This week, the U.S. and Iran held indirect talks in Vienna. That marks really the Biden administration's first big actions towards rejoining the JCPOA. That's the Iranian nuclear deal. And according to Dr. Trita Parsi, the U.S. needs to move quickly on these negotiations with Iran to ensure that the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action is revived ahead of Iranian domestic elections.
So, Professor, Georgetown University, author and executive vice president of the Quincy Institute, Dr. Trita Parsi joins us now to discuss. Dr. Parsi, lay out what exactly these indirect talks, so to speak, mean, where in the calendar year we are getting towards the critical dates, and whether you're encouraged by these developments.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for having me. We're actually past the critical dates. This should have been done earlier, but better late than never. We have the Iranian elections coming up in just 2 months, so this is already a very, very sensitive period. But the good thing is that there's movement, and that there's good movement. The two sides are not talking directly yet. They're talking indirectly through European intermediaries. But what has been agreed upon is that 2 lists are being negotiated right now. One list that is detailing all the steps the Iranians need to take to come back into full compliance. And the other list, which is a lengthier list, is all the things the U.S. needs to do to actually rejoin the deal and be in full compliance. And that includes, hopefully, the addressing of more than 1,600 sanctions that the Trump administration imposed on Iran, partly as part of, reimposing all sanctions, but a lot of it was just done in order to make it as difficult as possible for any future administration to try to go back into the deal.
So give us a little bit more in depth on what some of the stickiest issues here are going to ultimately be.
Well, the stickiest of the stickiest is the fact that a lot of sanctions were imposed by the Trump administration on entities in Iran that already were sanctioned. They did so to make it extra difficult to get these sanctions lifted, because the JCPOA is about the nuclear issue. It means that nuclear sanctions need to be lifted. So what did they do? Well, for instance, if the Iranian central bank was sanctioned under the nuclear issue, they would also then sanction it under terrorism authorizations. Or a third thing, thinking or calculating that, yes, the Biden administration potentially would lift the nuclear sanctions, but it cannot touch the terrorism sanctions. But what that does is that it makes it completely meaningless to lift the nuclear sanctions, because those sanctions are still in place, and the Iranians are not going to rejoin the deal or come into full compliance if they're still being sanctioned in a way that makes it impossible for them to engage in normal trade.
Got it. And Dr. Parsi, lay out again the timeline in Iran about the domestic political considerations that they have whenever it comes to this deal.
Well, so on June 18th, the Iranians are having their elections. Their elections season is a little bit shorter than the American one. I think the American one is probably the longest in the world, but still in it. We're already in it. This is now past the Iranian New Year, which was on the 21st of March. And under normal circumstances, this is now considered the election season. But I think because of the importance of this issue, and because of the fact that rather late, but nevertheless, the Biden administration started to show some real sincerity on this issue, and they do want to move forward right now, and they're trying to move as fast as they can. But it is a tougher lift right now because of the Iranian elections. So I think both sides are trying to move this fast, but the issue is that if the Biden administration is not going to be able to undo these additional sanctions that were solely put in place to make it impossible to rejoin the deal, then we're still going to have a major sticking issue here.
So the Israelis in general, and Netanyahu in particular, have always opposed this deal and continue to do so. What kind of pressure will they bring to bear, and what is the other pushback that the Biden administration is receiving here?
I think what the Israelis are doing right now is that they're trying to whip up support for their position on Capitol Hill. And this is a problem for the Biden administration, without a doubt. This has been part of the reason why I think they moved a little bit slowly, because they needed to first get through some of their domestic priorities, and they didn't want to confuse the two, and they didn't want to get extra opposition to those domestic issues because of what they needed to do on the Iran deal. But you also have another thing going on, which is that the Israelis have been engaging for more than 9 months now in a covert war on the high seas, in which they're attacking Iranian ships, and now we also see the Iranians have started to attack some Israeli ships. So that's a very volatile and explosive situation, and if that gets out of control, then that could definitely undermine the entire diplomatic endeavor, which already is very sensitive. And I think one thing we have to keep in mind here is The reason why the United States needs to get back into the JCPOA is because the JCPOA in many ways is the ticket out for the United States from the region militarily. The Iranian nuclear program needs to be checked in order for the United States to be able to check out of the Middle East militarily. And this is precisely the reason why the Israelis and the Saudis and others are opposing the JCPOA. They want to keep the United States militarily engaged in the region permanently.
Excellent point there, which people often overlook. Appreciate you joining us, sir.
Thank you for making it so plain. Great to see you, sir.
Thank you.
More Rising for you after this.